This has been an incredible year for the foundation. We are celebrating our 5th year, and in our wildest dreams did we ever dream in our 5th year that we would be able to bring someone like Dr. Rushing on board, who would be sort of leading the charge for our research program. We are so lucky to have her. And we're so excited to introduce you to her, and she has hit the ground running, truly full steam ahead. My head is still spinning a little bit from all the projects that we're working on together. And we will start off by having Dr. Rushing introduce herself, talk a little bit about where she went to school, why she is passionate about advocacy and particularly rare disease. And then if you have any questions, you can put them, I believe there's kind of a question answer section. You can just type them into there and we will ask your questions for you. So let's start. And if you want to start kind of where you're from and your background, your schooling.
Awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. And I'm really excited to be here with you all. So my name is Gabrielle Rushing, and I completed my PhD at Vanderbilt University, so about 20 minutes away from where I live in Nashville right now. And during my time there, I was in the neuroscience graduate program. So I focused on neural development, so how the brain actually develops from stem cells. And I did this in the context of another rare disorder that you may or may not have heard of called tuberous sclerosis complex, or TSC. Similar to OCNDS, it's a kinase protein that's affected. And I studied how tumors form in the brain in a mouse model of this disease, as well as stem cells in small dishes. So that was my focus of study. But during my time at Vanderbilt, I also took classes in basic developmental biology, as well as cancer biology. So learned a lot about how cells signal or talk to each other during that time. And prior to that, I actually was at the University of Florida for my undergraduate and worked with plants and how they make floral fragrance happen. So quite a jump to neuroscience. And the reason I made that jump is because I was really passionate about why people do the things that they do in general, which leads us to the brain. And the brain is what I consider to be the next frontier. We have so many remaining questions about how it forms, how it is modulated over time, and how our brain development then affects our behavior. And so during my time at Vanderbilt, when I was studying this rare disease, I had an opportunity to do an internship with the affiliated patient advocacy group for tuberous sclerosis, which was the TSC Alliance. And I did an internship back in 2017 with them. And I was able to meet with many members of their community and go on their event called March on Capitol Hill, which is in the beginning of March, where we all went to different Senate offices and requested meetings with officials to advocate for research funding from the Department of Defense dedicated towards this rare disorder. I also was able to help them with a patient-focused drug development meeting that was externally led by the TSC Alliance. And this is where we got to hear directly from people who are affected by the disorder and their family about what are the most pressing issues, what were their views on drug development, sort of what risks they might be willing to take versus a benefit. And the FDA was there, and I co-wrote the Voice of the Patient report that the FDA now has and can use for their decision-making progress. After this internship, I was really passionate about being in a role like that. Before this internship, I didn't know that a role like that existed for scientists. So I kept in touch, and shortly after graduate school, I was recruited to work at that patient advocacy group, which I spent 3.5 years at as their research director. And I did a few different projects. One was establishing patient-reported outcomes, which, if you haven't heard that term, it's a broad term to make sure that the voice of the affected individual, or in the case of someone not able to speak for themselves, a family representative or caregiver representative, answering questions directly related to what goes on in their day-to-day lives. And these are becoming very important for drug development processes and making sure that your voice is heard. I established a whole genome sequencing project, which is very important, as you might be aware of, in OCNDS as well, to be diagnosed appropriately. And I ran their natural history database to study the disease over time, and a biosample repository, which is where we collected samples such as blood or surgical brain tissues for researchers. So it's a really broad overview, but this has led me down my path and in this role.
Like I said, again, we couldn't be more thrilled to have you on board. Your vast experience is really going to accelerate our research program and help us find some answers for our kids. And so we're so grateful to have you. And that being said, you know, you mentioned TSC Alliance, which is considered kind of the gold standard in the rare disease world. They're a very large rare disease organization, and we are a rare disease startup, as I always say, just running lean, scrappy. And so what motivated you to join our organization and take on the role of a science program director, where you went from really kind of Fortune 500 rare disease company to kind of a startup?
Yeah, that's a fair question. So I actually saw Jennifer's job posting on LinkedIn through my shared connections in the rare disease space. And I was really admiring how vulnerable Jennifer was in the words that accompanied the job posting. So I immediately clicked on it. I read the job description and said, I can do this. I have all the experience to do this. This would be a really great career move for me to establish some independence and help a much smaller group get their feet wet and ground running in research. So I ended up applying for it, and within the first meeting with Jennifer, we immediately clicked. Felt like it was a wonderful fit. And since I had been studying TSC for almost 10 years at that point, it was also in a way exciting to jump over into something new that had related symptoms, related cell signaling, that I could then take what I've learned over the years and really just hit the ground running and dive in quickly with this role. So it was exciting to be able to make that career change, but also to be able to provide what was needed at the time, at the right time to come in. So that's why I made the jump, and it's been going really well so far.
And for us, and in all honesty, when we first put out the job posting, it was for a part-time position, right? Because we are a startup, we are lean. And when we met Dr. Rushing, we knew we had to try to figure out how to get her on board full-time. And so it's going to take some crafty fundraising and bootstrapping, but we're doing it. And so we're, again, like I said, we're so never in our wildest dreams did we think that we'd have someone full-time. And then with your background and just your work ethic and your can-do attitude, and really it is amazing to see you be able to come back, right, where you have a full marketing department, and now you have, you know, where we are the marketing department. So I love it. What goals and objectives do you have for the science program in relation to OCNDS?
Yeah, and one of my major priorities that I'm bringing with me from some of the projects I did initiate in my former role is I want to make sure the community voice is heard, and not only heard, but acknowledged and incorporated into what we prioritize, right? If it's not going to change something or benefit you and your family in day-to-day life, then it's not going to be a priority for us at the time. So really, I want to accelerate research to make sure we have high impact studies with collaborative researchers. I want to make sure our researchers are working together and not competing against each other for funding, and sharing data that could accelerate research over here so they don't have to repeat experiments and so forth. And by doing these in parallel, I think we can really expedite our chances of finding a treatment target in OCNDS. And as far as sharing research broadly, I'm a big advocate for open science. You might be aware that sometimes when you go look up a research paper, it's behind what's called a paywall, where they try to get you to pay money to read the study, which I think is just really one of the big barriers in research. So we're a big advocate for making sure our researchers publish in journals that allow for open access, where anyone in the public can read it, or that we have the ability to share the results with the community directly. And instead of just sharing the research paper, which I understand can be quite difficult to read and understand if you're not a scientist, one of my big goals, and especially working with Jennifer, is ensuring that the language is understandable to you. And if it's not, to let me know so we can talk about it. And then translating the summaries or descriptions, however we want to describe it, into different languages, because OCNDS doesn't just affect people who speak English. On that note, I also want to make sure that research is not scary to you. So if, let's say if a clinical trial was going to pop up tomorrow, I want to make sure that the community is well informed, has their questions answered, and isn't scared to take part if that's something they are considering. And since we are a startup, as Jennifer stated earlier, and ultra rare, one of my main goals over the next couple of years is to make sure our foundation profile is elevated. So making sure that we attend relevant events and conferences, that we talk to other young scientists about OCNDS and get them engaged and interested, so that way more people start to get involved over the years. So those are my major objectives that I see moving forward in this role.
Yeah, I love that we are 100% aligned on raising the profile of the foundation, making sure that our community actually has a shared language with the scientists, so they're on the same page when they're talking about things, and also making sure that the symptoms that are affecting our community and that are really going to make the most meaningful change if we hit them with a drug or a treatment, that the families are really involved in that, because sometimes, as you know, we can see that what the researchers think are important or not important to the families. And so I just love how aligned we are on that. Are there any ongoing research projects or studies related to OCNDS that you're currently involved in or planning to initiate? And how can the OCNDS community actively participate and contribute to the research efforts? And also, that being said, are there any opportunities for involvement in studies or data collection for our community that you encourage them to get involved with?
Yeah, so I ended up, in preparation for this webinar, I did make a few slides just because I want to make sure everyone is informed about opportunities that they might have. So I'm pulling those up now, which I'll go through briefly, and of course can answer additional questions on. But I just want to emphasize that being represented in research is extremely important. I actually pulled one of these testimonials from the webpage. I don't know if this family is on, but I pulled their quote of, "We participate in research to offer hope to future families that there may be a standard of care upon diagnosis." So I've heard from families with rare diseases in the past that when they hear the word research, it's often only considered to be, people working with cells in a lab coat, and it's scary, or they're working with mice. But research is really a two-way street between the community and the people that are doing the research, so that we can improve clinical care for everybody. So by doing certain types of research projects, we can actually offer things like clinical consensus guidelines that can be printed and shared with clinicians around the world, so that everyone is ensured the same standard of care as we continue through. So I did just want to emphasize that point before I jump in to our main research project that we are recruiting for, and some of you might already be participating in, is the Simon Searchlight, which is our natural history study. And it's an international research program. And really the goal is to accelerate science and improve lives for people with many different genetic neurodevelopmental disorders. And I did want to highlight that 75 OCNDS families have participated in some capacity to date by signing up, providing their genetic report, and potentially filling out some of the medical history. And you may be thinking, okay, well, 75 families for our disorder, that's a lot. Why do I have to, or why should I go participate? So it's really important when we're in a situation like OCNDS where it's ultra rare. Your unique experience can be extremely valuable and extremely meaningful to research because there are different changes in the DNA that lead to different symptoms, as I'm sure you've talked about in some of the Facebook groups or when you talk with other families. No child is the same. So it's really important to be represented so that the research being done not only benefits other people who have participated, but you and your family as well. And with that, with Simon Searchlight, they actually do reports quarterly where you can look at how your child compares to the rest of the OCNDS community that's participating. And because you'll be involved, you'll then be on a contact list to be invited to participate in new studies about OCNDS as they arise. So it's a really great way to stay involved and be an active research participant. So Simon Searchlight, really the goals overall, this is a busy slide, but what they do is they collect your detailed medical and behavioral histories and optional blood samples. So how they do that is there's a long survey that you fill out as the expert on your child or yourself about how OCNDS affects you. They synthesize this information. So they take all the information from all the families and make a really nice summary report that's easy to read for everybody. And what's really cool is that they freely share this data, de-identified, meaning they're not getting your name or information. It's all aggregate data, so put together with qualified researchers so that we can engage more people into studying OCNDS. They also connect researchers from around the world that may not know about each other that are working on similar things. And as a whole, just promote better understanding of how changes in our DNA affect our development and our behavior. And so how does it work? You may already have done this, so if you have, bear with me. But step one is really just signing up online. It takes less than 10 minutes, and we have some videos that can walk you through that. You provide your genetic lab report to show what disorder you have, so in this case, OCNDS. You then fill out the important medical history. They offer some optional surveys that come out throughout the year. If you're interested in providing a blood sample, they can facilitate that. And then they'll reach out once a year to then update information. Because as we all know, as we age, things change, including our medications, how we're reacting, our symptoms. So they want to be updated each year. Most of the questions that we get are, how long does that take, right? You think about you or your child's medical history, there's a lot there. Usually it takes between 30 to 60 minutes, but it is self-completed. So when you want to sit down and do it, you can. And your data being used, like I mentioned on the last slide, it's all de-identified, and researchers have to be qualified to apply to use the data. And what I mean is their project is reviewed by other researchers and scientists to make sure that their goals are aligned, that they're going to protect the data as well and use it in a meaningful way as they go forward in their projects. And I did want to highlight the optional blood sample collection. They do collect blood from families that are participating if they would like to, and then qualified researchers can apply just like they do for the medical data to access the blood samples. How this works is in the Simon Searchlight database, you would consent to participate. You'd have your genetic testing lab report already in there, and they will confirm that you're eligible. And as far as blood samples, not only is the child or individual with the condition allowed to donate blood, in some cases, biological parents or full siblings can also donate blood. And this is really helpful when they do studies of how different conditions are inherited or what might be different in the DNA besides the variant in the CSNK2A1 gene that could contribute to how the syndrome presents in their child. And I bring this up now because sample collections are happening through Simon Searchlight in partnership with a organization called Combined Brain. They're a nonprofit also focused on neurodevelopmental disorders, and they're partnering with the Simons Foundation to attend different patient advocacy group conferences this year to collect samples on site so that it's facilitated in a much easier way for people to attend. So these are some of the locations that are currently available. I just wanted to highlight this for you guys. There are quite a few in Orlando this year, so if you're in Orlando, quite a few options. But if you're interested in participating in any way and need some help walking through it or signing up to donate a blood sample if you're already in Simon Searchlight, you can just email our research email here. We can provide that after the webinar as well, and we will help facilitate that for you. And then sort of as an intro into why blood may be important, donating blood's really important just for generalizable scientific knowledge. Researchers then use it to better understand the biology of OCNDS, how it affects different parts of the body. Of course, it can help with drug development, so discovering what drugs or compounds that may or may not exist already affect the biology and the signaling, and you're ensuring that your unique variant is represented. Centralized resource is on here. So by participating in the Simons Foundation study, you allow your samples to be stored centrally in one place, which then facilitates collaborations between research groups and people that may have never heard of OCNDS, but see that there are, I don't know, X amount of samples, let's say 50 samples in Simons. They'll say, wow, maybe I should be studying this disorder because there's these samples available. So really to pique interest. And then over time, the more resources that we have ready to go on hand, the more interested larger companies like pharmaceutical companies or biotech companies doing research are going to be interested in partnering with us and prioritizing OCNDS as one of their syndrome focuses in the future. So that's one of the ways that, you know, building up these resources over time, even though it might not seem urgent and it's, you know, no one really likes to give blood. I completely understand that, but this is how we really can generate interest from people that may not know about OCNDS yet. So that's why it's very important. And then lastly, just why taking part in research is valuable for everybody. The more people that we participate, the more likely researchers are to make discoveries that will improve lives of everybody that is affected. This type of research, so signing up with Simon Searchlight and providing your medical history, giving a blood sample is the best way to answer unknown questions about OCNDS. You know, for example, if you have younger children, how verbal will they be? Will they live independently? We don't know what the average lifespan is. Things like this will start to be answered by participating in studies. And research, like I mentioned, the very first part will lead to standards of care that clinicians can then use to make sure everyone has equitable access to the best care over time. So if you are interested, next steps are to sign up for Simon Searchlight, share with other families, and of course, on this webinar or later as questions pop up, I'm happy to share that. So I know that was a very long-winded answer to Jennifer's research participation question, but I did just want to highlight these things so that you're aware and have more information as we move forward. Oh, Jennifer, you are on mute again.
Thank
Sorry.
you. Thank you
There
so
we
much
go.
for the overview and explaining Simon Searchlight in a way maybe that we haven't before, to encourage more families to join. To date, we have over 180. We don't, the number changes every day. So, you know, probably closer to 190, et cetera, families from around the world who are actually registered with the foundation that we know of, that we keep track of. But we do know that there are more from the literature. So over probably 220, excuse me, at least worldwide right now. We do have a question from a family that's attending the webinar, which is, do you see potential overlap with research being done on other rare neurodevelopmental disorders and OCNDS, or does research have to be siloed depending on what protein or other cause is specific to the syndrome? Hoping that all research in various genetic syndromes can work together or push things forward faster.
Yeah, that is an excellent question. And my response is that yes, there are definitely areas of overlap between other rare neurodevelopmental disorders. The easiest one to say is there's another disease called Pobens, another long name, but the variant in the DNA is in the CSNK2B gene, which is a different subunit of the kinase that's affected in OCNDS. So we think there are similar symptoms across OCNDS and POBINs, but we think that the signaling downstream, so what happens in the cells, might be similar and correlated, and research into one might help the other. And if we go even more broad, if we think about neurodevelopmental disorders as a whole, or even autism spectrum disorders, there are a lot of similar things that are affected as far as signaling pathways that are maybe going overboard, too high, too much activity here, or too low. So there's a possibility that advances, let's say in things like Rett syndrome, which is a much larger rare disorder than OCNDS, that research there could help us by figuring out, okay, what pathways can we target? Can we try the drug that worked for Rett in our model systems, and what happens? So absolutely, yes, there's overlap, but we still need to make sure that we are highlighting OCNDS and getting not only the foundation name out there, but making sure people know what OCNDS is, so that we can start to be included in these larger studies and be classified as a priority gene to look at in autism studies. And the way we do that is what I just presented on, is making sure we have samples ready to go, data ready to go from families, and then making sure that families are interested, obviously, in continuing to provide that type of data and encouragement to participate. So yes, great question.
And the great news is that we, from the beginning, have tried to make sure that we aren't siloed. So we've made many connections with different neurodevelopmental conditions and their leader heads, their researchers, to make sure that we keep a pulse on what's going on, but then also that if there is potential to collaborate, that we do collaborate. And we do work actually closely with the CSNK2B group. And there's already been some papers that have come out kind of linking both of our syndromes. So we're considered sort of sister genes or sister syndromes. I'm going to put you on the spot a little. We hadn't talked about this in advance, but
Sure.
in Q4 of this year, so kind of November, December, Dr. Rushing will sort of give an overview of where we're at. She's been diving deep into what we've been doing the last 5 years, getting in contact with our research team. So she will kind of provide an overview of where we're at. Today was just more of a meet and greet, but putting you on the spot, sort of when you came in and I told you we were in startup mode, obviously, sort of what are your kind of initial impressions of what we've been able to accomplish in sort of the short amount of time that we've been around?
Yeah, so when I first joined on, and I was starting to investigate, who our researchers were, what resources we had already on hand. I had talked a little bit with Jennifer during my interview, but didn't understand, the extent or depth of what we had on hand. And I was pleasantly surprised. And I think the words I used were, we're in much better shape than I anticipated. So for example, some of the key researchers that have been funded by the foundation, particularly Dr. Rebholz in France, when you come in as a new science director, you're a little hesitant of really investing heavily in one person and having one person do most of your research. But as soon as I met with Dr. Rebholz, it was very eye-opening. This individual is extremely dedicated to working with us. I come up with ideas with her on Zoom calls just like this, and she takes it and will help me write a proposal and really answer any questions I have. So just to frame it a little bit for people on the call, we have 3 different mouse models in generation. And although that can be scary and slightly gross sometimes, I completely understand it's very important as we move forward with potential drug compound testing and simply just to model the syndrome in a different organism. Additionally, we have 9 different cell lines called induced pluripotent stem cell lines. And these are very popular right now in science because you can do a lot more targeted research in a source from a human body in a dish. So not testing in live people, not testing in live animals, but the cells from an individual with the disorder and the DNA change in there. And we already have 9 lines that are established in collaboration with the Simons Foundation. So these are what I call like ready to go research resources that we're now focusing on characterizing them and publishing scientific papers on them to really further engage other people to come work with us and partner with us. So although it is still a startup, we still have lots of work to do. There's been, I think when I calculated a couple weeks ago in the literature, 25 science papers that mention OCNDS, which is pretty amazing for only being discovered in 2016. And we have a larger group of researchers that work with Dr. Reb Holtz or are affiliated in some way that are really interested in the kinase that's affected. So the product of the CSNK2A1 gene, the kinase CK2, we're now able to rope in people who have been studying this specific protein over the years and get them interested in OCNDS because they have all of this background knowledge. So we're hoping to get all of these researchers together in the next year or two to focus discussions on how we can better target our research projects and make sure that not only are we just studying the basic biology here, but how can we translate it over? So although we're in startup mode, I think we're in really great shape to generate a roadmap, which, as Jennifer alluded to, I'll be presenting in Q4 of this year. So very excited.
Great. And are there any specific challenges or barriers you foresee in implementing the science program, and what strategies do you propose to overcome them? I mean, what comes to mind first is funding.
Yes. So funding is, my answer is that, as a nonprofit, patient advocacy group, funding is always going to be a challenge. So how I'm approaching this is I'm really acting as a boots on the ground person to help with that fundraising effort. One of the ways I'm doing that is by working with some of our existing researchers to help them apply for grants. So helping them with the writing part, the administrative part, and getting, hopefully, if they're granted the funding, getting a portion of that back to the foundation to cover our efforts and help us continue to do the type of research funding we're doing. Engaging additional researchers. I've been reaching out the past 2 weeks to try and get 2 researchers in touch with each other for a grant opportunity that I've seen. And I've established an email list of researchers that not only study OCNDS, but affiliated syndromes or affiliated research in the kinase to send them announcements about different research programs and grants so that hopefully we can facilitate their applications, help apply, and potentially get money back. And in the future efforts, as we learn more with our mouse models and our cell lines, like I talked about, we're hoping to have targeted pitch decks that we can bring to larger foundations or potential interested groups to present the project and how much it will cost and do some targeted fundraising efforts for projects. So those are some of the ways that I see us overcoming that funding issue in the future.
And then lastly, at least on my end, is there anything else that you'd like to share or discuss regarding your role as the science program director for Oger-Chung neurodevelopmental syndrome and the foundation?
Sure. Yeah. So my email inbox is always open. If you have questions, concerns, anything like that, I would love to hear from you. And one of the things I would love to hear, whether it be on this webinar or if you take some time to think about it, is I would love to hear from you, the community, about how you want to hear about research. So when do you want to hear about it? Do you prefer a webinar video presentation like this? Do you prefer a summary write-up? Would you prefer a podcast? So how do you want to hear about research? And in the future, I'm hoping to learn more also about the community's perception about research. Like, what would be impactful to you? What would you want to know if a potential clinical trial was coming out? Do you want to know more about how clinical trials work? All sorts of questions like that I would just love to hear from the community. And it can be today, it can be 2 weeks from now, whenever you feel comfortable and have that question or have comments about that. I'd love to hear about how we can help you better understand what's going on and make sure you're informed along the process.
Great. Well, we'll maybe give it a minute or two to see if anyone wants to put any questions or comments in the kind of question and answer section of the Zoom webinar. I will say one of the exciting opportunities that Dr. Rushing has provided is the chance to have some science kind of interns come and work with the foundation and potentially work on some of these projects and helping us disseminate information on how you want to learn and hear about research. And so recently she was at Vanderbilt. I don't know if you want to tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So Vanderbilt invited me back as an alumni. They have an annual career symposium where current students and postdocs, which is a position that's after someone obtains their PhD but still works in an academic lab to continue their work. They go to this career symposium and get to meet with people in all sorts of different science careers to learn about their jobs, how they got there, what they can do to get that type of job. So it was really great. We had roundtable discussions. We had 5 different discussions groups. So I talked with over 30 different students there, and a lot of them were interested in patient advocacy positions, which is just really exciting to hear because looking back at my PhD time, I didn't even know this was an option for a job until roughly 2018. So it's really nice that we're now putting this out at the forefront to get more younger researchers engaged and moving forward. And as Jennifer mentioned, we put on an internship to the Vanderbilt students. We're going to hear back by the end of the month for a science communication type intern, where they're going to help us facilitate communicating to you all different scientific advancements, how drug development works and things in the future. So we're looking forward to seeing who applies for that and getting things rolling with that project.
I'm not sure if you can see the questions or not, but we
say now, yeah.
have one comment about how one of our participants likes to has enjoyed the webinars by researchers at the foundation conference. Slides with visuals are a great way to help understand. I also like the write-ups of research papers in simpler language the foundation has done and posted on the website. So that's the kind of research explained section that we started a while back, where we still are hoping to train our researchers in how to write in a language that also our community can understand, which is a work in progress because their job is to write like scientists. So, but we always appreciate their effort and their willingness to learn. So, and I know that Dr. Rushing will be helping with those write-ups that come out. There was an anonymous question, which is, if there's going to be clinical trial, how far out it might be, and do you have a hypothesis?
Yeah, I have lots of ideas after reading the literature. None of them are as solid as I would like them to be able to speak about them today. But it really all depends on the basic science that happens that we're funding now. It could be as early as a couple years. And I say that because depending on the types of experiments we do, let's say, for example, if a compound that we test in a lab is already FDA approved, it is a lot quicker for us to jump and try to get it into clinical trials because there's already been safety done in humans. If it's already being used in a different disorder or for a different indication, it's a lot quicker for us versus if we're doing something very, very basic down the line, a brand new compound, there are a lot more hurdles for us to move through to make sure that it's safe for a human to even try that. So it could be as early as a couple of years. I can say that some of the grants I'm working on with our researchers are really focused on how we can facilitate using existing FDA approved drugs as a first round, so-called drug repurposing. And I can say we're also really interested in helping out with the sleep issues that are taking place in the community. So there are ongoing studies, but right now I can't say how far out it would be for a clinical trial. And I do see, oh yeah, one more question on the bottom, referring to OCNDS as an autism spectrum disorder. It'd be good for people to be given this information when they are diagnosed. Many of our families are either not aware or don't want to acknowledge this. And that's understandable. It can be a scary term to have that identified as autism spectrum disorder. And I will say a caveat, not every individual with OCNDS will have that diagnosis. It is a benefit for us to include that in a symptom list and to acknowledge it, because it opens up avenues for clinicians interested in autism, research opportunities in autism. It really opens the doors for us to be involved. As you might be able to see, even in the news, autism is a very highly regarded research area of study. So if we can be included in that, it's actually for the benefit of all of us. But I agree, it would be great to have more information on that. Jennifer, do you want to comment on maybe the gene review overview that was generated? That might be helpful with some of that information for families.
Sure. Dr. Oker wrote a chapter in Gene Review, which is a publication that's regarded by clinicians around the world, that they go to look for care recommendations. They're not care guidelines, but they're sort of a first round of recommendations. And he wrote that in 2022. And it's not in language that most of us can even begin to digest. So we created a 4-page outline that's on our website that can be printed out, and we're encouraging clinicians to print it out as well, to inform individuals sort of the symptoms that we're seeing. That obviously, even though there's a significant portion of the community that has autism spectrum disorder or traits, not everyone does. And so that's the same with all the symptoms, as it varies from person to person. But hopefully when clinicians start to look at the symptom list, they can go down and figure out sort of what kind of testing they need to do for their patients. So, sometimes we've seen scoliosis in patients, or we've seen some heart defects. Some of these are more not as common, meaning maybe only 4% of the population thus far has seen to have it, but at least they can have it on their radar. And two, the way that they're diagnosing autism these days is a bit different, right? Before, if it was, oh, they make too much eye contact, or they seem too happy. And so since they've changed kind of the criteria of how they're diagnosing it, now those that have OCNDS are now receiving an autism diagnosis. So yeah, we completely agree, and we hope to be included on the autism lists going forward, because we are excluded from research currently, since we are not on the list. We are on what was it called? We are, you had sent it to me the other.
Yeah, so on the Simons Foundation, they have an autism research initiative as a whole, and we are on the autism risk gene panel, and we encouragingly have been listed as a level 1. So that means a priority 1 gene, meaning there's a strong correlation with the DNA variants that take place in OCNDS, and then the percentage of individuals affected that then have autism. So this is actually a great thing for us, because now researchers will be able to go into Safari, see that we are a priority gene, and hopefully this will be bringing more people into the fold to study OCNDS.
I think we just have some comments here. Someone said the CSNK2A1 Foundation is very fortunate to have Dr. Rushing join the team. We 100% agree. She brings a wealth of experience and ideas to raise awareness of OCNDS and hope for individuals and families affected. Thank you very much for a nice presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you for leaving that comment. And another participant feels like they're already in an undocumented clinical trial because their child's doctors have never heard of OCNDS or have dealt with an OCNDS patient. And so they're just doing trial and error with the meds for OCD, autistic behaviors, ADHD, traits. And
Yeah.
so they're excited to hopefully one day participate in an actual clinical trial.
And that's a great sentiment. Thank you for sharing that and being vulnerable to share that. And I will say, I recently went to a conference called the World Orphan Drug Congress, which really focused on rare disorders and treatments for it, and had a really nice small table discussion with some people about clinical trial outcomes. So sometimes in a clinical trial, they're focusing on something that really doesn't help the family. You know, for example, in rare diseases that have tumors, they'll focus on, okay, did the tumor shrink? And then they consider it a success if it does, but the child's behavior or learning capabilities didn't change. So they're really focused now on incorporating outcome measures that are pertinent to the day-to-day lives of people. And I will also say there was some discussion on different clinical trial formats, which was exciting to hear about the progress with that. One example is they call a basket trial, and those types of trials incorporate many different syndromes or disorders into one trial when there's evidence to support that a drug or a compound might benefit multiple different disorders or syndromes. So that goes back to, I think, one of the first questions we had here, where, you know, research into OCNDS might benefit other syndromes and vice versa. So there are talks with the FDA as well as the National Institutes of Health about these alternative structures for trials. So I'm hopeful that there will be an option for OCNDS in the near future.
Well, we're going to wrap up for today. I can't thank everyone enough for joining, and those who couldn't be here, this will be recorded. Please join us in December, where Dr. Rushing will go over our research roadmap, sort of give you an overview of where we were 5 years ago and where we are today, and the exciting opportunities that have come up with new partnerships.